There is no warning screen, no statement of intent, no explanation of what you're about to see. At first glance, it barely feels like a finished site at all. The design is simple and almost careless. Plain text, red background, no images to guide you. Websites like this tend to surface quietly. They are not promoted or indexed in any meaningful way. They appear in passing references, archived links, or brief mentions from people who stumble across them in the deep web and do not stay long. It does not look theatrical. It looks unfinished, like something abandoned halfway through construction. But that emptiness is what makes it unsettling. It presents itself with a kind of indifference, as if the viewer's presence is irrelevant. Nothing invites you in, but nothing tells you to leave either. There's no explanation for who made it and why it exists. No date, no credits, no visual updates. It feels static, frozen in a single state, as if it has always been this way. The longer you look at it, the more it feels less like a web page and more like a container, holding something without acknowledging it. That uncertainty sets the tone. Not fear, but unease. And not shock, but quiet discomfort. And once you notice it, it becomes difficult to ignore. It is the kind of place that makes you hesitate, even before anything happens at all, for reasons you cannot explain clearly. The user does not arrive at looking for something extreme. It happens during routine browsing on the deep web, framed as just another obscure link among many. There is no sense that clicking it will lead somewhere significant. At first, it feels disposable, like something you could close at any moment without consequence. When the page loads, nothing immediately happens. It's just text and red. The site doesn't rush to reveal itself, it waits. That stillness creates a brief moment of control where the user feels free to leave without missing anything important. Then the link becomes noticeable. They are listed plainly with no explanation and no hierarchy. Operation, toy, and dinner. 3 simple words presented without emphasis or warning. They are not framed as videos or files. They are not labeled as disturbing or experimental. They are just there, waiting to be clicked. At this stage, curiosity outweighs caution. The site has not earned fear yet. If anything, it feels mundane. The user clicks, not because they expect something shocking, but because the page offers so little information that clicking feels like the only way forward. There is also an assumption at work that whatever appears will still fit within normal boundaries. The internet trains people to expect framing, titles, descriptions, context. But here, none of that really exists. The absence feels strange, but not threatening. And that moment, before the first video plays, it's deceptively calm. It is the last moment where experience feels optional rather than imposed. The user has no reason to anticipate what follows. Before clicking anything, the user pauses. The page has not changed, but the weight of the 3 links begins to settle in. Operation, toy, dinner. Each word is familiar on its own, yet together they feel misplaced, like labels pulled from different rooms of a house and pinned side by side. There's no instruction on where to start, no suggestion that one is safer or lighter than the others. That lack of structure matters. Most websites guide you, even subtly, but this one refuses. It leaves the decision entirely to the viewer, forcing intent onto an otherwise blank page. The words themselves are unsettling precisely because they are ordinary. Operation suggests procedure, control, something technical and clinical like an operation. Toy suggests play, softness, innocence. Dinner suggests routine or comfort. None of these ideas belong together, but the site treats them as equals. The user hesitates longer than expected, not out of fear but confusion. The brain searches for pattern, for logic, for an explanation that never arrives. The simplicity feels deliberate, as if the site is testing how much meaning the viewer will project on their own. At this point, nothing explicitly harmful has happened, but still, something feels off. The links do not promise anything, and that uncertainty creates tension. Clicking becomes less about curiosity and more about resolving discomfort. Eventually, the user chooses one, not because it feels right, but because staying still feels worse than moving forward into it. The first link the user opens is Operation. The video loads without a title card or explanation. There's no narration, no text overlay, and no clear indication of what the viewer is supposed to understand. The only thing below the video is a simple sentence that says, "A simple operation on a patient." The footage begins abruptly, as if the recording started mid-process. What stands out immediately is the tone. The camera does not react. It does not linger for emphasis or pull away in discomfort. It just simply observes. The framing feels intentional but detached, removing any emotional guidance the viewer might rely on. And what is shown next is deeply disturbing. It does show an operation on a patient, but it's far from simple. The user tries to make sense of it. Is this a documentation? Staged? Real? But the video offers no answers. There's no visible concern for the viewer's comfort and no indication that anyone involved expects to be seen. But what makes the experience disturbing is not a single moment, but the absence of explanation. The video feels incomplete, like a fragment removed from a larger context that the viewer will never access. There is no resolution, no clear beginning or end, just a stretch of footage, disturbing footage, of an operation that exists without justification. By the time the video ends, the user is unsettled but unsure why. Nothing has been explained, and nothing has been acknowledged. The site does not respond to the reaction it creates. It simply waits for the next click, as if the first was only an introduction. The unease lingers longer than expected, because the site never really confirms what the viewer just witnessed, which leaves interpretation to fill the silence and make the experience feel personal in an uncomfortable, inescapable way. The next link is labeled Toy. After operation, the word feels almost insulting in its calmness, like the site is daring the viewer to misread it or something. The user clicks anyway, expecting something similar, maybe even harmless. Under the video is a short phrase similar to operation, but this one says, "The peaceful sounds are lovely." The video starts with a dim, quiet room and a fixed camera angle. For a few seconds, there's almost nothing, just grainy footage and faint background noise. But then very briefly, you hear a baby crying. It's not that loud and it doesn't last. It's just a sharp, human sound that vanishes as quickly as it appears. But that 1 second changes everything. The cry forces a new set of assumptions in the viewer's mind, and the video seems to lean into that discomfort. The user sees a person in frame and objects that suggest a domestic setting, but the scene doesn't behave like a normal home video. The camera doesn't have to comfort anyone. No one speaks. The footage continues in a slow, detached way, but then it shows disturbing things happening on screen without spelling why. That title, Toy, becomes a trap. It encourages you to search for something simple, but the images and the video push in an opposite direction. The user tries to understand what the video is implying, and that effort becomes exhausting. It feels like witnessing a story more than being forced to sit with something unpleasant and unexplained. And after the disturbing content that's showed, which I cannot specifically say on YouTube, there's no context and no why. By now the site's pattern is clear. It's ordinary words, private feeling footage, and a refusal to explain, and showing disturbing content to the viewer which could scar them for life. The user notices something else too. The video feels uploaded without shame. Not hidden behind a login, not blurred, not disguised. It just sits behind a simple link as if the viewer's reaction is irrelevant. And that coldness is what lingers afterward. The final link is dinner. By now, the user knows that the titles can't be trusted, but the word still carries a normal feeling. A meal, a table, something everyday. The user clicks, hoping quietly that this one might be less severe, but it isn't. The video opens on an outdoor scene. The camera is close to the ground and the image is harsh and unsteady, like it was recorded quickly and without care. But then the subject becomes clear. It's a cow on the ground that has passed away. The body fills much of the frame and the camera does not look away. What makes it especially hard to watch is what covers it. Maggots move across the surface in clusters, turning the scene into something that feels both real and deeply disgusting. There's no commentary, no warning, and no attempt to frame it as educational. The footage lingers long enough for the viewer to register texture, movement, and the sheer indifference of the recording. The user's reaction turns physical. The stomach drops, the throat tightens, and it's not just disgust. It's the feeling of being trapped in a view you never agreed to hold. The title dinner starts to land like a cruel joke, forcing a connection between the food and decay that the mind doesn't want to make. And that's the point where the site becomes different from ordinary shock content. It isn't fast. It doesn't flash and move on. It stays, insisting that you sit with it. The user tries to look away, then looks back and checking whether it could really be this direct. When the video ends, the user closes the tab immediately, but the closing doesn't undo the movement. The image persists and the word dinner doesn't return to normal. It becomes a label the user can't hear without remembering what the site attached to it. Afterward, the user tries to dismiss it as just some gross footage, but the pairing of the normal word with a real, decaying body keeps returning, uninvited, late at night. After closing the site, the user does not feel relief. There's no sense of completion or safety, just a sudden quiet that feels heavier than before. The screen is gone, but the reaction remains, and the body still feels tense and the stomach unsettled. The mind keeps replaying fragments without asking permission. What stands out is how quickly the curiosity turns into regret. The user did not know what they were looking for in the site. There was no intention to push limits or test endurance. The site simply offered itself without explanation, and the consequences arrived after the fact. There is also confusion. Nothing was framed as a challenge or a test, yet the reaction feels disproportionate to the effort that it took to get there. A few clicks, a few minutes, and now something feels terribly wrong in a way that is hard to explain to someone who hasn't seen it. The user closes other tabs, clears the page, and steps away, expecting the feeling to fade, but it doesn't. The discomfort lingers in the background, resurfacing unexpectedly. Sounds feel sharper, images come back in flashes, not vivid enough to describe clearly, but strong enough to disturb. What makes it worse is the lack of narrative. There's no end in the processing and no explanation to lead on. The site does not follow up. It does not haunt directly. It simply exists somewhere in the deep web. That indifference becomes part of the experience. The user realizes that whatever the site is meant to do, it does not care how it affects people who find it. The burden of meaning and of recovery is placed entirely on the viewer. This site stands apart from typical disturbing content because it refuses to explain itself. Most unsettling material on the internet comes with framing. The titles warn you, and creators justify intent. Even extreme content tells you what it's trying to be. But this site does none of that. No context, no moral position, and no visible goal. The videos are not introduced as art, commentary, or documentation. They're just simply presented. That absence forces the viewer into an uncomfortable role. Instead of receiving meaning, the viewer has to construct it. The brain searches for purpose, pattern, or intention and finds nothing solid. That uncertainty creates anxiety because humans rely on explanation to regulate emotional response. Another factor is pacing. The videos do not rush, they linger. They allow discomfort to accumulate slowly. There are no jump scares or jump moments or dramatic shifts, just steady exposure long enough for the viewer to feel trapped in their own attention. The language of the site also matters. Words like operation, toy, and dinner are familiar but neutral. They lower defenses. When those words are attached to disturbing footage, the contrast creates a lasting discomfort that doesn't resolve once the video ends. This is not content to scare in the traditional sense. It's not to threaten or provoke directly. It just destabilizes expectation. It removes the cues that people use to emotionally protect themselves. That is why the experience lingers. It doesn't just show disturbing material. It creates a situation where the viewer feels responsible for what they have, even without understanding why it is shown to them in the first place. Trying to understand this site leads to more questions than answers. Some viewers interpret it as an art project, built to test emotional limits through contrast and ambiguity. Others see it as provocation, designed to unsettle without explanation. There is a possibility that it is neither. The site does not identify itself as creative work. There are no credits, no statements, no framing devices that suggest intention beyond presentation. That makes interpretation difficult. Calling it art feels speculative. What complicates matters is the selection of content. The videos feel deliberate, not random. The titles are chosen carefully. The order matters. The experience builds. That suggests planning, but not purpose. There is also no attempt to attract attention. The site does not seek views or reactions. It does not ask to be shared. It just exists quietly, almost passively, which makes assigning motive harder. This ambiguity may be intentional. By refusing to explain itself, the site avoids responsibility. Whatever meaning the viewer takes from it becomes their own burden. The creator, if there is one, remains invisible. And that invisibility is unsettling. We look for someone to assign intent to, but this site denies that instinct, leaving the viewer alone with the experience and no clear way to categorize it. Whether it is art, provocation, or something else entirely may not matter. The uncertainty itself becomes the final layer of discomfort. Eventually, the user stops thinking about the site. Life continues. Other videos play, other tabs open, but certain words no longer feel natural, and certain images arrive without warning. And finally, the videos that he saw are scarred in his head. The site does not rely on fear in the traditional sense. It does not chase the viewer or escalate after the fact. It just simply leaves an impression quiet and unresolved. There is no lesson offered and no clear warning to pass on. It exists as proof that some corners of the internet are not designed for viewing or understanding. They exist without concern for the people who encounter them. The experience does not feel curated for an audience. It feels incidental, as if the viewer happened to step into something that was never meant to be seen or never meant to acknowledge them. In the end, the site is not memorable because of any image, but because of how little it explains and how disturbing the video is. It reminds us that curiosity does not always come with intent, and that some things, once seen, cannot necessarily be forgotten.